Hey there, friends. I hope you're having a good week. It's Monday here. I had an interesting weekend. I had a play that I wrote that's been developed by some theaters, and there's another developmental reading up in Northern Mass this weekend. So I went to go to that, and that was lovely. I'm on like a social media moratorium right now, where I'm basically not looking at Facebook. I am looking at Instagram because there's sort of lovely quietness in pictures, but yeah. Anyway, I've got some G&T for you tonight, some gin and taro. This is my new thing. Cheers. Little gin and tonic, little gin and taro. It's getting me through. So let's talk about the Suit of Cups tonight. Let's continue on with these sort of meanings and ruminations. And again, I think it's worth pointing out this is just what has come up for me over the years, from reading, from experiencing readings, from looking at pictures of the cards, from listening to people who are smarter or more knowledgeable than me on this, and just in general, you know, in investing in the world. So the Suit of Cups is interesting to me. Oh God, I already said it. For any of you who watched the swords video, you know how I feel about the word interesting. The Suit of Cups fascinates me because I think it's one of those misunderstood suits. I think it's really, really easy to relegate the Suit of Cups purely to romance. But I don't think that's what it's all about. Although I am among those who tend to relegate it purely to romance. This is, I think water is more than the stereotype of loving somebody. Water is an interesting element, and I think of Memoirs of a Geisha, somewhat controversial movie because of people's feelings about the casting, and I understand that, but the book and the movie are really interesting to me, and one of the quotes that I love in it is that the girl in it, Sayuri, talks about how she is representative of water, and someone tells her, when water's way is blocked, it finds another path. So I think to relegate the Suit of Cups just to romance does it a disservice, because there's a resiliency to water that we lose out on. It doesn't block, or it doesn't stay blocked. It moves forward, unlike other elements. There are things that can block fire. There are elements or things that can block air, but water has a harder time being blocked. There's an inevitability and a sort of tenacity to water that I don't think when I say we, I mean I, give necessarily enough credit to. So there's something really interesting about that. Did it again. Interesting number 2. There's something, by the end of these videos, I'm never going to use that word again. There's something really fascinating to me about that when we look at it that way, because there is a tenacity and resilience. There is a fluidity, for lack of a more creative word, to the suit. And I think, again, even in relationships, the interesting thing about feelings is that they can't be controlled. We can do it. In the last suit we talked about air. I talked a lot about anxiety in that video. Water or feelings aren't as easy to control even as thoughts are. We can, in a way, make ourselves think about something else, but it's really, really, really hard to make ourselves feel something else. My therapist always tells me that we can't judge our feelings, and when we fight them, they bite back. And I talked about that a little bit with anxiety last time too. We can't judge the way we feel. It's the way we feel. So we've got to work with it. And water can be a destructive element. And there's the other thing too, especially when it gets pent up. When water, is dammed, it needs to go somewhere. It doesn't just, it's not ephemeral like air. So it will build up, and it can spill over. And I think there's something interesting in water in that suit too. So there's a lot to this suit that goes deeper than, you know, he loves me not, which maybe not is a fair thing to do. But I feel like certainly a lot of kind of quote beginner books or little white books tend to focus more on the lovey quality of this. So when I think of the Suit of Cups, I do, I do think of love. I do think of lovers and romance, but I also think about friends and family and fellowship and emotions, experiences, feelings that, again, are going to exist whether we want them to or not. And that's the weird reality of water. And that's the weird reality of feelings. They are entirely up to their own devices. They are impish in that way. They just are. And so much of what we do in the course of a day or in the course of a life is affected by how we feel about something. And so we also get a sense of intuition with the water suit, which is a fairly common association. So the Suit of Cups is there's it's deeper than, still waters run deep. It's deeper than maybe we give it credit for, which is ultimately where I'm going. So let's talk about the cards card by card, and we'll start with the Ace of Cups. I was going to use different decks for each video, sort of sticking with these two as my my standards, and then mixing up the other two decks. But a lot of the decks that I use kind of regularly and really love, like the Shadowscapes, are really hard to see from a distance, and I can't get close enough to show all four cards and see enough. So I just said, you know what, I'm going to go with these four decks. They're four decks that I think are really effective and that I really like. So we get kind of a different perspective from Wild Unknown, and then we get different permutations of Waite Smith with these three. So the Ace of Swords I talked about last time is sort of the seed of an idea, and I think that the Ace of Cups is the seed of a feeling. It's that recognition of a feeling, of an emotion. It's that spark of interest. It's that pinprick of, oh, there's something interesting about the aces and the pages where it's like the discovery of something or the realization of something. Now the pages are seeing it, they're looking at it from a distance, you know what I mean? They have a more Some Enchanted Evening view, they're seeing what they want from across a crowded room. The aces are sort of that trickle of feeling within us that makes us go, oh, I never looked at that person that way before, or oh, I never felt something like this before. So the aces in that way are the sort of first blush of a feeling, good or bad, because I think we can feel attraction to someone, but we can also feel repulsion. So the ace can be attraction and or repulsion from something. It's that feeling of like, oh, or oh, so there's that. So it could indicate budding relationships, again, not just friends, I mean, not just romance, but friends, new feelings about something. It could be like a new perspective about something. It could be a person, but it could also be sushi, you know what I mean? Like, I never wanted to eat raw fish before, but oh, that looks really good, and I suddenly feel differently about this food. You know what I mean? It's that new experience of something, whether or not you've encountered it before. There can be a clearing of emotional energy with the ace. It can sort of wash an experience. So the Ace of Cups can be cleansing, and it can sort of wipe the slate clean. It can be the revelation of feeling or an admission of feeling. It could be, it could be the dawn of the age of Aquarius, for example. But there is that sort of impulse, that initial spark of interest. I was going to use the word desire there, but I actually don't think that applies to the Suit of Cups. I think that the spark of desire applies more towards the Wands and even the Pentacles. It's a fine line, but I feel like Cups long for, and Wands desire. There's a different attitude wands are less melancholy. They are more aggressive. They are more lusty. Cups are a bit more melancholy, a bit more poetic. There's a gentleness to cups that isn't there with water. So it's not passivity, but there's a reactionary quality to the water suit as well. So they long, they aspire to, they dream for, they want, but they don't lust, they don't, they don't desire, they don't aim to possess in a way. Do you know what I mean? So that's the Ace of Cups. Um, Now the next card, I'm just making sure. Oh, sorry. Let's talk about negatives. So a reversed ace, if you're using reversals, or an ace in a negative context, feels delayed. So there's either a delayed dawning of feeling, a delayed spark of interest, a delayed feeling, or what I like even more when it comes to cups is like a suppression of, a holding back of, a walling up, a damming of feeling, emotion, longing for. There's a little bit more melancholy in its negative, a little bit more of a tendency to, even melancholy isn't the right word. Where like there's something romantic about melancholy. There's something depressed about the negative ace. In that sense, it's denying our feelings. It's knowing that feelings are there, but they're unrequited. So that's the negative, or the ace in its negative context. So then we get to the Two of Cups, which is sort of the longed for relationship card in many ways. It's, it's probably more romantic in its way than the Lovers. I really love the way the Fountain Tarot handles this card, and it's dark, but you can kind of see it doesn't feel necessarily romantic in the stereotypical sense. It's also kind of hard to tell the gender of the characters. But there's this very dreamy quality about it. The Ellis deck is a bit more sort of stereotypically, longing for, which is interesting. And then the Wild Unknown has no people in it at all, and I kind of like this because of that. There's a unity in the twos, and we know that from the math. It's one and two coming together, so there's a duality there. So it's also a card that has a lot of light and shadow to it. Again, kabbalistically, twos deal with wisdom, and so there's a kind of sense of knowing each other in the Two of Cups, and you could get to that sort of biblical, the way we sort of, it's fun, like, oh, they know each other biblically, and so you could do it with the raised eyebrow of, they fucked each other basically, or they know each other in a way that's far more intimate. So there's like a knowing in there. There's an intimacy of, it's like a deep intimacy of connection, that sense of wisdom, of really knowing another person, of having, those people, whether or not we're interested in them romantically or sexually, there are people that we meet and it feels like we've known them our whole lives. And I think in the Two of Cups, you get that sense of, that's the kind of wisdom of really knowing another person. So there's a mutuality there, connection. There's a reciprocity to the experience. There's a sort of sharing of experience, a sharing of feeling. It could be very simpatico. I like the way that in Anne of Green Gables, Anne Shirley used to talk about kindred spirits. So there's like a kindred spirit here. And, spirits even beyond, emotional spirits. It could be sharing a drink with somebody, going out for drinks. So if we're talking about a really practical thing, what should I do on a date? If this card comes up, what should I do on a first date? Well, falling in love with each other and proposing marriage is probably not the right thing to do on a first date, but it could say, hey, let's go share a drink. Maybe that's the place to start. So there's a practical reading in there. There's a flirtatiousness, so you have the kind of beginning of the flirtation of a relationship. This isn't marriage, it's just a two. It's the beginning of, but there's that initial draw. So there's that flirtatiousness, the budding of a relationship. Again, the temptation is always to read this card romantically, and it makes sense because it's stereotypically drawn. Pamela Coleman Smith kind of gave us the man and the woman together, and so it's hard not to. But there's this there's this sort of the medical symbol, the catechus. There's a clinic, that makes me think of a clinical aspect to this relationship too. So it could be in more negative tenors, a convenient relationship, like a marriage of convenience. It could be a one-way relationship, or it could be misunderstood or misdirected advances or feelings. There is an element of fantasy in the Suit of Cups that we always have to be on the lookout for. So we want to make sure that, especially like if we see cards like the Moon with a lot of Cups cards, it's a good time to sort of wonder if we're seeing things realistically, or are we just fantasizing? Because the Moon can shift our view of reality. The Moon can create a sense of falseness, or a sense of fantasy, a sense of illusion. So if we have a lot of Cups cards and the Moon, we have to pause and ask ourselves, are we really seeing reality, or are we sort of fantasizing? You could get some gossip in this card. You could get some like affair energy, some like jealousy. But for the most part, this is generally perceived as, a largely pretty positive card. With the 3, we get a pretty consistent energy, even in more non-traditional decks. There's the coming together of the 1 and the 2, and so here's where we get community. And it's hard to not get a sense of sort of sisterhood and coven quality with the Waite Smith deck that's been carried through, for a lot of popular decks. We get it kind of across the board. And there is a coming together. There's a community, there's a collegiality, there's a covenant quality, and an agreement, a pact. Again, the coven, friends, friendship, deepened connections. But then this could also go into small social gatherings. You could get into community events, support groups often come up here, or taking advantage of your support system can come up in the 3 of Cups. Then there's again an element of sexuality here, so you could have threesomes involved in this situation too. Again, kabbalistically, the 3 is understanding, and so again there's this sense of simpatico. There's this sense of finding your tribe, of being among like-minded people and feeling home. It's that sense of arriving somewhere and feeling like you've belonged there your whole life, and knowing that this is home, whether it's another person or people or a group, a club, a hobby, something. There's that feeling of I've arrived and I belong here. So again, really positive. Now, on the converse side, you have a sense of feeling left out of a community, or being pushed out of a community, or feeling like a third wheel. It could mean that you're longing for support that you don't have, or that you feel is missing, or that you need to go in search of. Again, there's that sense of longing with the Suit of Cups. So you could be longing for this community, longing for this sisterhood, or this covenant that you can't find. So there's a want in the more negative 3 of Cups. There can be snideness or exclusivity here too. If we think of 3s as understanding, then the negative aspect of that is not understanding. And it's not misunderstanding. It's a willful refusal to understand. So then we get into like Mean Girls territory. So there's something there in the 3 too, as well. So that's the 3. But by and large, this card reads pretty positively. But it's always nice to know the shadow of the card. And I have talked about this before. I'm not really using reversals right now, but I do feel times when a traditional, and I've talked about this before. There's a video I talked about on loving the scary cards, where you're going to feel it whether you use reversals or not, where the 3 of Cups is just, it's going to be the absence of, or the longing for, or the willful exclusion of, because again, that's another part of community. In order to have a community, there have to be people on the outside of that community. Now, that doesn't mean we have to force them out, but that's the natural nature of communities. If everyone were in the community, then it wouldn't be a community, it'd be sort of a universality. So whether it's because we don't share interests or because we're snobs, there's always going to be someone on the outside. So anything inclusive there's going to be some element of exclusivity. And so we get that with the 3. Now we get into the 4, which is one of the, again, I talked about this with the oh god, I can't remember. It was one of the swords the other day. Maybe even been the 4. There's a quality of the 4 of Cups that reminds me of the 4 of Swords. They do seem to have a relationship in some way. And kabbalistically 4 is mercy. And you definitely can read the 4 of Swords as mercy, because there's a merciful rest. There's not a sense of like traditional mercy in the 4 of Cups. There's a longing for mercy. There's a longing for reprieve here. There's a longing to have, a longing to be blessed in a way. And if we look at the original sort of classic Pamela Coleman Smith, there is this sort of hand coming out of the sky. We're waiting for a blessing, but we're not connecting with it. We're not seeing it. So there's a sense of like longing for and not having, even if the energy is available to us. The 4 of Cups is one of the most interesting cards to me in the deck, and I do not really see it come up in readings that often. And I wonder if in part it's because I don't have I don't have strong feelings about it, and I think one of the reasons why is this is a card of not having strong feelings. There is an apathy to the card. And you get that in a lot of decks. Actually, this is one of the cards in the Wild Unknown I'm not in love with, because I don't think you get that same energy. Even in Cups, the cards in the Wild Unknown that have no creatures on them of any kind, there's still an energy related to the card and its traditional meanings. I don't quite get that with the 4 of Cups. But I know, in a weird way, I'm always kind of reading the Rider-Waite-Smith deck anyway. So the negative, and this is a traditionally negative card, you do get apathy. There's just a sense of being in a funk, you know what I mean? Of being out of it, of being depressed, of being discontent or disillusioned. There's a wallowing quality to this. And there's something luxurious about wallowing, We obviously shouldn't do it much, but there are times where wallowing just feels good. And in a weird way, it's kind of healthy to stay in that state sometimes. It's not something we want to be in all the time, but sometimes being, pitying ourselves, being self-pitiful isn't bad, because we need it to a degree. So we sort of transition there from the negative aspects of the 4 to the positive aspects. Now, you could go into a positive state here. I talked a lot about the 2 and the 4 of Swords as relating to meditation. I think the 4 of Cups has a meditative element to it as well, especially because the depictions are frequently so nebulous. They're not as sort of sad feeling, as lost feeling as the 5. There's a kind of whatever attitude. And because they're not very strong, you could get a sense of meditating or trying to meditate and not being able to. Trying to figure out what you're feeling and not being able to. How do I feel about this situation? How do I feel about this person? How do I feel about this community? So there's that sense of kind of feeling, unknowing, unsure, considering. You could consider this as a card of concentrations, especially sort of concentrating on the state of my emotions, concentrating on how I feel. There's an element here of unseen guidance or an unseen hand at work. Um, or even the idea that, maybe if we do sit and consider our blessings, that can yield more blessings. So again, not the richest card in a lot of ways, but it is a card that strikes me because it is so sort of apathetic in a lot of ways. The energy of the card feels sort of blah or funky or meh. There's like a mehness to this card. Um, and that's a thing that we experience in life. We feel meh sometimes. We feel, I love this thing. We always say overwhelmed or underwhelmed. This card is whelmed. I'm just whelmed by that. It left me whelmed. So, it could be the feeling of something you thought was going to be really sexy and isn't. Or, having gotten excited about a relationship and it turns out to not be that exciting. Seeing someone for their reality rather than the romantic fantasies we make up about them. The sort of realization of mehness, which could be my memoir. But it could also be a meditative state or an internal state, a working through of our emotional state too. So there we have the 4. Now, unlike the 4, there's nothing meh about the 5. And this is not a card, and as I went on my little tirade at the beginning about how the suit of swords, the suit of cups rather, is more than just love. I'm talking through my traditional interpretations here, and I'm realizing that they're really focused on that. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's a huge part of our lives. But I think that the I think we owe more to the suit of water than to just relegate it to relationships. Romance, because not that there's anything untoward or uninteresting about that thing. There's just water is more interesting than that. It's more layered. And I think in the 5 of Cups we get that layer. And this is I think this is the first real depth of the suit of cups is the 5. Now, Kabbalistically 5 is strength. And I like that for this card because there is clearly a sense of loss, a sense of mourning, a sense of having had to given up or leave something behind, missed out on, having something taken away. The don't cry over spilled milk cliche of this card is, it's there for a reason. And again, we owe it to Pamela Coleman Smith because that's what she sort of gave us. And the colors here in this card always remind me sort of the humors. So there's this sense of melancholy, colic, the sort of Shakespearean humors, those Elizabethan humors. But there's a strength to this card because the person isn't collapsed. The person isn't in a heap on the floor. The person isn't even necessarily ignoring what they've lost. In fact, they're facing what they've lost in most images. So it's an experience of feeling sad and staying there and not running from it. The writer Anne Lamott, who I really admire, and she has a great book about writing that I love called Bird by Bird. And there's a great documentary about her called Bird by Bird with Annie. She's a great writer. She's a novelist and she writes about faith and Christianity. And though I'm not Christian, she has a very progressive, inclusive attitude to her faith, which I like a lot. But she talks about how when you race from grief, the person or thing that you're grieving goes away faster. But if you stay with it and you experience it and you feel its full measure, that thing you've lost is still sort of with you in a way. And she's got this beautiful quote that I've shared with others before when they've experienced loss, because I never know what to say, but I think what she says is so beautiful. And I'm going to misquote it now. Um, but if you Google Anne Lamott and loss or grief, you'll find this. But she talks about how, in life we're going to lose people we love and people we feel like we can't live without, people we can't live without. And we don't ever really recover from that. It's like a bone. She says it's like a bone that breaks and doesn't heal properly, but we learn to dance with the limp. And I think that's the most beautiful thing, because that's so much of what life is for us. We're constantly losing, and we're constantly weighted down by what we've lost. And we've all lost so much: youth, time, dream, whatever. Not to get too maudlin, it's just part of the experience of being alive is losing, is grieving. And this card embraces that. And there's a strength in that. There's a strength in staying within grief, in not moving too quickly past unpleasant feelings, of not running away from unpleasant feelings. And yeah, you know what I mean? In a lot of interpretations of this card, a couple of the cups are still standing, and we find hope in that. We haven't lost everything. And of course, that's another thing in life too. We've rarely lost everything. The only time we really lose everything is at, the actual end. But to me, it's become an interesting thing, because the standing cups are less interesting. I think it's a reminder that we do go on. But there's something in this card about letting ourselves sit within and feel the full measure of our losses, of really feeling it and staying in it and not running from it and learning from it and experiencing how that strengthens us and learning to dance with the limp, as Anne Lamott says. This often makes me think of non-attachment, this card too, which is a Buddhist theory or belief, or goal is a better way to describe it, which is that one of the most beautiful examples of this theory that I ever heard was on the documentary they did on PBS about Buddhism, or Buddha. And one of the commentators talks about, I have this glass, and it's a beautiful piece of glass, and I love it, and I'm so happy I have it, and I feel so lucky for it. But then I knock the glass over and it breaks, and I'm devastated, and I feel like I can't go on, and I've lost. But if I recognize that the glass is already broken when I get it, then every moment that I have with it is precious. That to me is what this card aims for. So there is a saying goodbye to in this card, but there's also a theory for me, or a feeling of recognizing what we had, mourning what we had, but recognizing it as having been special. So this is a really big, complex, layered card to me. I think that there can be more negative things. So we can refuse to accept loss, we can refuse to accept impermanence, we can refuse to grieve, we can throw tantrums, we can think about only what we lack, focusing on what we wish we had gotten, loneliness, or just sort of crying over spilled milk, to go back to that sort of traditional concept there. So, in terms of the negative, we get that in there too. But this is one of the more interesting cards, and I think when this card shows up in a reading, I said interesting again, I've been better this time. It is interesting, though, and it's interesting's literal sense, because there is so much to it. And I think when this card comes up in a reading, it asks for a strength from us to not fight what we're feeling, to stay there and experience it and learn from what it wants to teach us, even though it doesn't feel good. So there's our 5. All right, with the 6, it's a pleasanter experience, certainly. And again, I read this pretty traditionally. It does have a feeling of memory, of nostalgia for me. This is where I really love what the Wild Unknown does, because we have this feeling of roots and rootedness and connectedness, and give me wings and give me roots. That quote from somewhere that I don't know. So there's a fondness, there's a nostalgia, there's a wistfulness, there's a remembrance, there's a kindness to this card, a looking back, not in anger, looking back fondly, a remembrance, maybe like a eulogizing of an experience, not necessarily a person, but an experience, a remembrance of an experience, Proust, remembrances of things past, and Madeleine's, and tea, and, just, um, this card makes me think of Christmas in the way of, when I put up the tree every year, you don't even really connect with the things that, the religious traditions of that experience of my childhood, but I'm drawn to, even though I don't consider myself a Christian, it's always tempting to put up the manger scene, the crèche, as we say in French Canadian, because it's nostalgic. It feels like childhood. It feels like, the Advent wreath or the Advent calendar, laying under the tree looking up at the lights. It's that feeling of sort of lovely longing for the past. There are, when I used to live in a city nearby when I was in my early 20s, I used to walk around the city sort of thinking about all of the things I couldn't wait to happen, and sort of not being very happy in my life because those things hadn't happened yet. And I wasn't very happy in my early 20s because there's always a sense of waiting for. But now there are nights in late summer where I'll be driving through that city, and I'll suddenly get this longing for that time, even though I wasn't very happy then. But there's something, what I miss in a weird way is the hope. So even though I wasn't happy, I had this sense of hope that I don't have anymore. I know not everything is possible. I know that the older we get, we have to settle for things. That's that's life, and I'm okay with that. But I miss that youthful sense of anything being possible, and I feel like this card sort of encapsulates that sense of anything being possible, of that, not even that feeling of anything being possible, but that feeling of missing and longing for, and the nostalgia that just that moment where, like, the scent of something takes you back to that moment at your kitchen table where you were really happy as a child, or the way, someone looked at you, or whatever it is, this card embodies that feeling, and it embodies our feeling of connectedness to others, our feeling of connection to other people, and the energies that we get and give to and from other people. And so in that way, there's a relationship between it and the Six of Pentacles, because there's a reciprocity there too. So there's a close relationship. That's a more practical, maybe financial or charitable give and take. This is a more emotional one, but they're similar. They're similar flows. And of course, 6 Kabbalistically is beauty. And there's something beautiful about that little ache of missing, that little ache of longing for the past, and it's not a sadness, or it's not an unpleasant sadness. It is sort of the essence of melancholia, of sort of, it's a gentle sort of longing for. And I think it's really lovely. This is a very lovely card. I don't traditionally find a whole lot of negativity in here, but again, you can find yourself dwelling or clinging to the past, or stewing in what you didn't get. Similar to the 5. The 5 focuses on what I don't have in its negative connotations. The 6 focuses on what I didn't get, and I should have gotten that, and I lost out on that, and I missed out on that, and I gave that up, and I shouldn't have. So it's regret. Rather than nostalgia, it's regretting and sort of feeling negative, and wanting what can't be had, and regretting not having gone for it. So there's the 6. The 7 of Cups is, again, one of the more unusual. I hate that word too. It's a fascinating. I'm replacing interesting with fascinating now, and it's just becoming just as meaningless. Um, it's about illusion. It's about fantasy. It's about fantasizing. It's about possibility, right? And sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's really good and healthy for us to go into modes of fantasy. Sometimes it's really good to think about what might have been or what could have been or what we could have. Anyone who's been in a relationship knows what it's like to want someone, or to fantasize about someone else, right? That's very human. So wanting and fantasizing is very natural. Exploring all possibilities emotionally is very natural. But we can become completely lost in fantasy, and that makes us unable to exist in real life. When 50 Shades of Grey came out, we started to see this in what had been fairly stable relationships. And I don't know how widespread this was, but it certainly came up in the news where relationships were ending because, someone read that book and felt like, I need my life to be sexier. I need my life. And maybe it did need to be, or maybe it didn't. Maybe they were reaching for something that isn't realistic. The interesting thing about relationships as we get into adulthood is that they're about figuring out what we're willing to settle for. All relationships, whether they're romantic or not, are settling. Hiring someone for a job is settling. Being in a relationship with someone is settling. Now, we traditionally associate settling with negativity. Like, no one wants to settle for anything because that means we can't have it all. Settling is the realization that imperfection is all we have. Imperfection is about as good as it gets, right? Nothing is perfect. And that's negative. Especially in the United States, we are not conditioned to accept imperfection, to settle. Except it's all that life asks of us. Now, choosing what we're willing to settle for is the key, So if you're in a relationship and there are X, Y, and Z qualities that you're getting from the person in it, but they're lacking, A, B, and C qualities, you're constantly weighing which things, what's more valuable. Are X, Y, and Z more valuable? So you stay in the relationship? Or are A, B, and C more valuable? And so you end the relationship and you go in search of it. So either your marriage of 30 years that's comfortable but not very sexy is important to you, and you find fantasy interesting but not devastating, you've settled for that. Not a bad thing, but you've settled for it. Likewise, if your marriage of 30 years suddenly seems unbearable because you need something sexier, you're not settling for that. You're going to go find something else, But it's all about settling. And the Seven of Cups, in a weird way, asks us what we're willing to settle for. The Seven of Cups presents us with life's options and all the feelings we could be feeling and says, what are you willing to settle for? What is it that you really want? Are you willing to settle for anything? And if you're not willing to settle, it's going to be really hard for you to move on to the next step. And so in the Seven of Cups, too, you have this balance of either choosing to settle and engaging in fantasy as a way to counteract our feeling of having to settle, or living completely in fantasy and being unable to settle. So there's a duality there with the seven that's very difficult. So it can be a lot to choose from, a lot to fantasize about, daydreaming. It's very sexy to do all of those things. And I don't mean that in like a sassy way. It is sexy to fantasize. But when we become paralyzed by that, or unwilling or unable to settle for anything life has to offer, we become really discontented. And we can't move on to the last few phases of the Suit of Cups until we settle. And the Seven of Cups teaches us, you got to settle. What are you going to settle for? You can't have everything. It's just inevitable, Even though the Nine of Cups and the Ten of Cups sort of make us think we can, it's a myth. When we're going to get there and talk about what the Nine of Cups and Ten of Cups really says, but the Seven of Cups says you can't have everything. You can't feel everything all the time. You can't, even the most perfect seeming relationships are imperfect in some way, and we're settling for something. And that's what this card's really about for me. Um, because I don't think settling is a bad thing. I think settling is human. Our friends who may be a big gossip and a pain in the ass, who calls us whenever anything mildly dramatic happens and we have to pick up their pieces, but who makes us laugh and they're great and they're there for us when we need them. We're settling for the mess part because we're getting something. It's, this sounds very cold, but it's a return on investment that's valuable. And I don't mean that in a cold way. Our emotional investments are important. And that's, I feel like, what this card is about. So, yeah. Now, I hadn't really thought about this until just now, but in a weird way, the transition from the 7 to the 8 is the interesting thing of leaving behind. So when you settle, you have to leave something behind. And in a weird way, and I had never thought of this before, the 8 is that process of leaving behind. So I'm not going to have Prince Charming, but I am going to have this person who's there for me when I need him and who, you know, asks me how my day was and who makes me smile. So, Ben Affleck is not coming to rescue me from my life, but so I'm going to leave that behind. I'm going to leave those fantasies behind for the moment. And so there's an evolution here from the 7 to the 8, and then even in the 9 and the 10, if we continue going that way, and that can be good and it can be difficult. It can be painful, and it's not, again, it's not about like giving up and like, throwing in the towel and saying, all right, this is the best I can hope for. It's not that. It's, and if that's how you feel about something, then you're not settling for it, or you don't want to settle for it. And so that's a sign. So, so the 8 of Cups can mean not being willing to, move on from, or not being willing to settle for. So there's something in there. But anyway, I hadn't really thought about that until just now, but it's an interesting evolution. But there is a movement forward, and there is a leaving behind. And so this card is about, it's about an emotional growth. It's about letting the baggage from the past stay there and saying, okay, I'm going to explore this next phase, and I'm going to do my best to release all this other stuff that held me back. All this baggage from before, I'm not going to carry with me as much as I can. Now, we can't ever truly leave it all behind, but there are moments of our ability to sort of move forward separated from our pasts. And there's an idealism to the ability to do that. And so I think this card reflects in a way that idealism of forward motion. It's also, in the 5 of Cups, I talked about non-attachment. This card embodies non-attachment. The 5 of Cups teaches us that suffering is, which is again a Buddhist thing. The 8 of Cups says, okay, now we're gonna go on anyway, So there is a letting go, a freeing of oneself, taking a new journey, a new path. There's a great quote from The Winter's Tale by Shakespeare: "What's gone and what's past hope must be past grief." And it's sort of that thing of like, okay, we've experienced the measure of our grief, we've gone through it, but there's nothing we can do about it now. So now we're going to keep moving forward. We move on. At the sort of climactic moment of Angels in America, the main character, Prior Walter, talks about how we want more life, even though life can be so much. He says, it's so much, not enough. It's such beautiful phrasing. Tony Kushner is a genius. It's so much, not enough, but we want more of it. We go on, and it's a very beautiful speech where he talks about, kids in third world countries where flies are laying eggs in their eyes, but we want more life. And it's just very human for us to want to keep going on. In fact, Tony Kushner uses a translation of the Hebrew word for blessing that means more life. And in this card, I feel like we see that concept of blessing. We go on, even when it's hard, even when we don't want to, even when the world turns out to be a far more hateful place than we imagined it. We move forward because it's what we do, and we leave behind. So there can also be a phasing out of loss, so moving out of the phases of grief, or a spiritual journey or a retreat. So this could be a relationship retreat or an emotional retreat, in both the literal sense of moving backwards or away from, not backwards, but away from, or like a retreat as in a weekend conference or, sort of thing. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes from my journal here. So then the negative connotations can be staying stuck, leaving unwillingly, really clinging to something, holding on to something that's keeping us stuck, a longing for a spiritual journey that doesn't seem to be happening, or a longing for a journey. Again, remember the longing in the Suit of Cups, or lacking a path, even lacking a direction or a way to a compass for a relationship. So that's the 8. I think Rachel Pollack, I think in one of her books, calls this card the Wish card. If it's not her, I don't remember who it was. This is the 9. And in the 7 moments ago, I talked about how, wanting it all and not being able to settle. And it feels like the 9 of Cups says, hey, you can have it all. It's party time. But I don't think that that's what the 9 of Cups is about. I think the 9 of Cups is about becoming content with what's available, becoming content with what's accessible, with what's there. It's the settling and being happy with that. Here's what I have, not here's what I'm lacking. That's for me what the 9 of Cups is about at its most positive. It's an abundance of feeling, but it's because we've accepted the parameters, we've accepted the realities, we've moved past the 7. In the 8, we literally decide to move forward. And then we grow and we realize that we can be happy by settling, not in a negative way, but by saying, here's what I have, here's what I'm getting out of life, here's what I'm getting out of my relationships, and focusing on what we have and not what we're leaving behind or what we've lost or what we didn't get. You know what I mean? So it's like a contentedness of constraint and being happy within the realities, and I think that that's what the 9 indicates in a lot of ways. It can be delight, indulgence. I think it can be, even more on like a carnal, not carnal, maybe carnal, treats and treasures, feasts, just feeling good. It can also be feeling good alone, by the way, because it is a solitary card when there are people in it. And so this can be a card of introversion. It can be a card of like, anyone out there who's an introvert knows the sheer joy of being alone after being with groups of people for a while. That's how we recharge as introverts. And so there's that. There's the sense of refilling the cup by being alone. Now, then there's a shadow side to this too, which I think involves gluttony and overindulgence. Overdoing it, overeating, over imbibing, binging. Or, being the person who's always celebrating longer than everyone else, or alone, So there's that to that. And then we evolve into the 10 of Cups, which is really, again, it's tempting to feel like the 10 of Cups represents having it all. It makes me think of 30 Rock. I'm a huge 30 Rock fan, by the way. Having it all. It's emotional fulfillment. It's not necessarily having it all. It's not a fairy tale ending. In fact, I happen to think that fairy tales are very dangerous in a lot of ways because, boy or girl, they teach us unrealistic realities of relationships, which is where we get stuck in the 7 of Cups. I think that's having a fairy tale view of the world. That's not life. You know what I mean? What the 10 of Cups does is it takes the 9, that sense of recognizing constraints and feeling happy with it. It takes it to the highest level of culminating, of feeling content, of feeling emotionally secure, surrounded by love, surrounded by kindness, surrounded by goodness, and recognizing and celebrating that. It is a celebratory card. There's a burst of joy in it. There's a a community, a familial quality to it. And again, in that way, it sort of links itself to the Ten of Pentacles. Um, it is a joyous card, but it's a joyous card within the acceptance of what's emotionally realistic and feeling abundant because we recognize what's possible, you know. And so the last three cards, the last three or four cards of the Suit of Cups is really about recognizing what's possible and being content with that, and then feeling fulfilled by it, you know. When in the Nine of Cups we accept reality and we find joy in it, then we're released from thinking about all that we lack, and we celebrate what we've got, and it's a very, very beautiful thing. And it can involve people, loved one, you know. This could indicate the sort of joyous celebration of marriage, say, you know what I mean. It could be that, if that's what we're longing for. But we have to recognize that, you know, the fairy tale always ends with the marriage of the prince and the princess. That's not the end of the that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of the story. That's where the fairy tale ends. But life is everything that happens after that. The Ten of Cups is being okay with that. The Ten of Cups is finding the joy in that and the beauty of that. And the sort of fullness, you know, and recognizing that we don't feel good all the time, but we feel all the time, you know? And celebrating that we feel, celebrating that we're not sociopaths, you know? Like, we can genuinely feel empathy, we can genuinely feel love and receive it. And that, you know, the culmination of the Suit of Cups is that ability to give and receive love, to recognize the joy of feeling, even when it's not feeling something good, as we talked about in the Five, you know. So it's an abundance, it's an explosion of water energy in a purely joyous way. So it can be surrounded by family and friends. There's a fullness to it. There's a hydration. You know, we're not dehydrated if we think about the Suit of Cups as water. It's hydration. It's like it's the opposite of a drought. You know, or not even the opposite of a drought, because that's a flood. But it's a liquidity. I don't know the word I'm looking for. And it can be about community. It can be feeling connected to the community. It can take the energy of the three and explode it into this beautiful, you know, culmination of a project, or especially an emotional project. Anyone who's been sort of on a retreat or a conference or something where they're with like-minded people, and there comes this moment where everyone sort of is glowing and vibrating from just sort of being around such great people. You know, we get that there. Negatively, again, it can lessen that. There can be a drying of things, you know, a dehydration, feeling, feeling finished, feeling trapped by emotions, you know, feeling sort of like discontented and like, oh, and feeling that sense of wanderlust and like, oh, is this really what having everything is all about? You know, so there's like a sense of, is this really what I wanted? You know, I kind of got what I wanted. Is this really what I wanted? So the negative shadow side of the 10 is that. So then we get into the courts. And again, the evolution of the Suit of Quartz is not all that different from me. So the page is discovering something. The knight is going in search of it. The queen is embodying and nurturing it, helping it grow. And then the king is the master of it. And so with the Page of Cups, or the Daughter of Cups, we get someone who's discovering their feelings for the first time. You know, they're discovering their sense of personhood. They're waking up to the emotional world around them. So, you know, there's sort of a pubescent quality to the page. You know, they're sort of waking up to their body in a way, experiencing new emotional states, sexual awakening. I talked about that a second ago. Starting to notice that the world is more than just what they feel. So there's like that realization that other people around them are feeling other things, and like the world, their life is not a movie that they're starring in, that like actions have consequences, and you know, what I do or what I say is going to have impacts beyond my own life. So there's that like discovery of emotional intelligence there. Um, and there is sort of a virginal, innocent playfulness to the Page of Cups. Now, conversely, that can indicate someone who's emotionally stunted, or a state of arrested development, right? Someone who can't see the world outside their feelings. So we do get some baby sociopath energy there in a negative form. Um, Someone who's refusing to awaken emotionally, or who's emotionally immature. Um, Someone who's terrified of growth. Terrified of experiencing maturity. Maybe someone who may need to be cared for more than is necessary. In a lot of stereotypical ways, the Knight of Cups is sort of Prince Charming. Um, and he is in that way. You know what I mean? He's definitely a hyper romantic seeker. He's gonna have the stereotypes of the knight in shining armor. He's the prince that everyone, or the princess that people fantasize about in their youth. Um, he is charming and romantic, and he will sweep you off your feet. Um, he's a seeker of truth and romance. He's sort of like a young Don Quixote in a way. He's idealistic and he's a seeker of truth. He's idealistic. He's filled with hope. He's filled with resilience, and he just, boundless hope for everything's going to be great. I am going to have it all. Maybe someone who's a little sexually clumsy or early in their sexual pursuits, but they're going out in search of what they want, and they're looking for it actively. They're taking ownership of their relationships, and they're trying to make their relationships into what they want them to be. I think about friends of mine who have told me how dating is like a full-time job these days. That's the Knight of Cups. The Knight of Cups is going to treat dating, or even making friends, as a full-time job. And they're very seductive, so it's not hard for them. Um, but conversely, they can be a player. And because the romance is sometimes more exciting than the getting, because knights are hunters, once they've gotten something, they can lose interest kind of quickly. And they want to move on to the next thing, because they are, engines. They are adepts of movement. So they can be kind of a player. They can be maybe not a player, but someone who's too shy to approach, or too shy to engage, or someone who's like a bit of a wallflower, or who has very low expectations for their love life, who expects someone else to do the work, or someone who's never satisfied. Um, Again, musical theater nerds, if you're listening to Hamilton, you got that never satisfied quality. So they're always going to have one eye. I think about the Knight of Cups and its negative as, the person who's listening to the radio and kind of likes the song that's on, but's always wondering if they're missing out on a better one on another station. So that's the Knight of Cups in his negative state. The Queen of Cups is the quintessential emotionally intelligent person. Just flat out. The Queen of Cups embodies emotional intelligence. And that's her greatest strength. She is intuitive, she is thoughtful, she is careful, she's gentle, she knows what people are feeling, and she cares for that. She is water of water. She embodies what she is. She's an intelligent, emotionally intelligent leader. She's an empath. She might be a therapist or a teacher, probably a teacher of music or art, or a romance writer maybe. Someone who's very sex positive, someone who's probably progressive and even tempered, someone who's probably been around the block in a good way, and has learned a lot of lessons from life, and has embraced the emotional challenges of life and learned from them and experienced them. Very even tempered. So the Queen of Cups, again, sort of embodies emotional intelligence. Just soup to nuts. So that means that on the other side of the coin, she can be a little conservative. She can be a little touchy about sex or romance. She can be someone who's maybe a little bit bitter, who's been made worse by her experiences, maybe made a little kind of embittered. I said that already, embittered. A little slut shaming. You can get some slut shaming with the Queen of Cups in their negative state. And again, when I refer to the queen as she, it's just reaching for the easy pronoun there. This can be a man. So, the Queen of Cups in her negative state is not as emotionally intelligent, or she uses her emotional intelligence to hurt. And then, last but not least, we get the King of Cups. And the King of Cups is sort of, he's dad-esque, but not necessarily in a paternal dad. He maybe represents the person who sort of initiates someone into sex, for example, or romance, someone's first, someone who's kind of an emotional or sexual mentor. Maybe someone who's older than you, in that way. Not necessarily though, but he's definitely an initiator of romance or sex. He's definitely experienced, and again, he's been around the block. This is the person you go to for relationship advice. This is the person that you look to be an example of relationship skill, of diplomacy, of wisdom, of how you engage in a relationship as an adult. The king embodies. He's the master of relationships. He is, he's in a way the perfect partner. If perfection weren't so annoying. And that's where we get into sort of the negatives of the queen and the king, is that perfection can get wearing. And because they never slip up, they never have a bad moment. They're so solicitous of your issues. Then it's like, I want to stab you because you're so good, and nobody's that good. Again, in the shadow realm, the King of Cups can be manipulative or like a seducer, someone who's kind of like a predatory seducer. Someone who's a bad example, someone you would never go to for advice. Probably the kings in general, in their shadow, can be really arrogant. This could be someone who may be drawn to people who are too young. Not like illegal too young, but like, just on the edge of being inappropriate. Or someone who is so enamored of youth, that they have to act younger than they are. They can't kind of age. They can't act their age because they're sort of again, arrested development. I talked about that with the page. There's a quality there. Someone unable to settle, so who embodies the worst of the Seven of Cups. So that is the Suit of Cups, and that's my long walk through there. This was longer than the Suit of Swords, but that's inevitable, right? But I did not say interesting as many times as I thought I would. Again, as always, I'm interested to hear what you think. I'm interested to hear whether or not this is helpful. I hope it was. Share your thoughts, and have an awesome week. Be well, be good to each other, and let me know if there's anything I can do for you. Take care.